So good morning again, everybody. We're completing a series today on pathways to prospering, and so I guess I'll begin by asking, has anyone gotten richer in the last 4 weeks? Oh, it worked? Okay, it worked a little bit. Every week, thank you, Paris, I'm glad, thank you. Every week we've tried to give something tangible to everyone because we're talking about prosperity. We want you to leave with something, but I figured if you weren't more prosperous, I wanted to make sure you were today, so I brought actual cash today. So Reverend Josh is going to make it rain this morning. But I have a gift for all of you today, and it's a dollar bill. It's a dollar for everyone. First things first, if you were here the first service, do not take another dollar bill. Everyone gets a dollar bill, and I think our Reverend Donna and Pam for helping get those out there.
Usually I'm taking money now.
Yes. Give it back. So while that's going around, I do want to share a quote to me that says a lot about abundance, but notice that it doesn't say anything about money. It's from Edward Everett Hale, a great Unitarian minister. He says, "I am only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. What can I do? I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do." And I love that statement because it says to me that richness and prosperous living has little to do in reality with money and everything to do with awareness. Being aware of our talents, our gifts, and especially the blessing of our own presence and how we show up in our day-to-day lives. How do we show up for the people that we love? How do we show up for our communities and people around us? That to me is a true statement of true wealth and of true being. All that being said, I'm giving out a dollar to everybody today, but there is a stipulation. And I want you to make me a promise. And the promise is, I'm giving you this dollar, but I want you to agree to never spend it. Frowns. Nobody's like nodding. Freddie's in, but everybody else is like, what? So everybody is giving a dollar. And I'll explain a little later, but I want to encourage you not to spend it. And I think it is a good, there's something about being rich that in a sense is kind of like being poor in a good way. Follow me for a minute with this. The idea is there's that experience of not having, but there's also that experience of not needing, of just being cool. I wanted to talk today. The talk title I threw out there weeks ago, and I had no idea what I was going to talk about, was called Broke Open. But I think the idea was, since I haven't had a whole lot of wealth in my life, I didn't want to get up and talk about how you can become wealthy like I am. But I do know a thing or two about being broke. And maybe you do too. And I will say that being broke at certain times has taught me a lot about how to be prosperous. So you'll hear me talk about being broke, and I know we usually have a negative connotation to that, but I mean it in kind of a positive way today. That there's an aspect of being broke that can mean, yes, not having, but also not needing. It can mean being very resourceful. It can mean being unplugged from commercialism and the rat race. It can mean being more receptive, because anyone here who knows, if you've been broke before, you have to be open to receiving help. And I actually want to ask you this morning to think about, how long could you go without spending any money? If just right here, right now, let's say after the offering today, you just said, I'm not going to spend anything that's in my wallet or my purse. Because if what I'm talking about is being broke, not having any money at all, but just your normal means of spending money. So still think money you can get from other people, still think all the change in your couch cushions, but don't think your normal means of spending. How long could you go? 10 minutes, a few weeks, different answers here. Maybe you have a commitment to pay for dinner tonight, Edison?
5 years and 4 months.
5 years and 4 months, okay. if you are unaware, spent 5 years and 4 months in the Hanoi Hilton Hotel as a prisoner of war serving our country, which we so appreciate and honor him for. But, you know, I'm going to entwine that into the talk a little later, I think. That's a good point. But maybe you have a dinner commitment, maybe you need to fill up the tank of gas, all those types of things. So there's money that we might need, but I think that there would be some wisdom for us not to hold back, but just to empty ourselves a little bit of what we've gathered and just allow ourselves to be truly resourceful. To unplug ourselves from that need to always have more or always spend. And to be open to ask for help, because maybe someone can buy your dinner tonight. Maybe someone might be open to filling up the tank. Who knows? But there's something really awesome, I think, that can be discovered in practicing being broke for a little while. I love, and I can fall into this trap, but maybe you do too. I always feel the need sometimes to have something new going on. I've got to go out and try this new restaurant. I've got to get this new pair of shoes. I need a new haircut. And although it comes from a place that's excited to spend and take place with life, it also sometimes comes from a place within me that's trying to hide that I feel poor, that I'm not enough. So I have to buy this thing. I have to go and see this new movie. I've got to get a new book. And for me, when I engage in that practice, I'm kind of like a on Christmas Day, the kid, and there's more and more of these kids, unfortunately, they collect all their presents and then they immediately start working on next year's list, you know, instead of playing with the toys or enjoying them. And we can get like that with our stuff sometimes. It seems to be that it's more about accumulating it than really fully experiencing it. Where I've truly experienced richness in my life is when I reread an old book. Or, you know, there's nothing cooler than rewatching an old movie that you really love. You know, it reminds me of that Nelson Mandela statement after he was released from prison, that it's amazing to return to something that you experienced long ago to see not how it, but how you yourself have changed and transformed. There's something really rich about being resourceful with what it is that we have. One of my favorite activities, it only happens once or twice a year, but I love to go dig in the back of the pantry to find that weird object. I have no idea what the hell I bought it for. It's like water chestnuts or something in the back there, black-eyed peas, and make a dish out of it. And it doesn't always work, but when it does, it tastes better than anything you've ever had because you're being resourceful. As opposed to trying to get something new in, you're utilizing what you have, and there's something there that doesn't just feed the body, but it feeds the soul a little bit too. I grew up in a family that didn't have a whole lot of money, and I had an interesting experience of how resourceful my parents are. After I moved out, I was about 19 years old, and I was away from Mom's cooking for a few weeks, and I asked her to make me a little cookbook of recipes of dishes that she used to make that I really loved when I was really little. And she started laughing hysterically at me for what I was asking for. And she said, "Josh, it's so funny because everything that you are asking me to make for you and give you a recipe are things that could be made from a liquor store." And the reason she brought that up is that my dad every Friday would take his check to the liquor store to cash it, and they take a little bit of percentage, but it was always religious that he would do that they gave my mom a little bit of credit when she would go into the store. And so if I wanted something like tuna casserole, she would get noodles, tuna fish, mushroom soup, a can of peas, and some Lay's potato chips to kind of sprinkle on top. And so we realized my mom, being so resourceful, could make the liquor store or the convenience store cookbook. It would be a great idea, something that she could do. But isn't there something enriching about being resourceful, about utilizing everything that you have? And in a way, allowing ourselves to be at zero in a certain way can be a very enriching thing. Some of you here grew up during the Great Depression, or your parents grew up during the Great Depression. I've been so inspired by one particular friend in here. She just had her 95th birthday. I guess I won't. Can I point you out? Her name's Dorothy Lance there. She's about 9 minutes old, but she shares with me stories about growing up through the Depression and how hard it was and how difficult it was to not know if you were going to have a meal or if your neighbor was going to have a meal. And yet, meeting Dorothy and so many people I know that grew up during that time, the values they have are so strong They appreciate what it is that they have, and even though they didn't have a lot of material goods, they had great dreams and great vision, and I'm so grateful that so many of them got to live in that greater vision. Someone who I've always respected greatly is that great mythologist, Joseph Campbell, and he was someone who spent his formative years during the Great Depression, and he shares, and he was a little lucky because he had saved up a little money from playing music, but he shared that he couldn't get a job and he couldn't make a regular source of income, so what he did is he decided to retreat to the woods. He said, it was from 1929 to 1934, 5 years. I went up to a little shack in Woodstock, New York, and just dug in. He had no idea what was going to happen 30 years later. All I did was read, and take notes. See, there's something cool there when you're broke, is you can actually finally dedicate yourself to the things that you love to do, as opposed to all the spending and problem creating and things like that. The great Alan Watts once asked Joseph Campbell how he meditated. And Joseph Campbell said, I underlined sentences. That was the thing that helped him feel most in the present moment. And Campbell shared that he would often not have money for books, so what he would do is he'd write to publishers asking them to send him a book, and he would promise to pay them back. And you know what? They almost always sent the book, because that was the type of values that folks encouraged and had during that time. And so being broke or being at zero in a good way means being really resourceful. In a way, it also means releasing yourself from the rat race. You know, right? What did Lily Tallman said? Even if you win the rat race, the problem is you're still a rat, right? So we get caught up so much in the materialism, in the commercialism, in the consumerism, that sometimes we give up on what we're passionate about. We give up on what we care about because we're so caught up in the spending and the making things happen and the sense of self-worth that can come from that at times we can sacrifice who we are. For many of us, to be at zero would actually be an enriching thing in our lives because we find ourselves in so much financial or psychological or emotional debt. You know, many of us in our life have fallen under the spell of what they call sunk cost bias. That's when you invest so much in something that you'll never get what you invested in it initially back or anything more. You know, think of a guy at a carnival game who spends way more money than the toy he's trying to win, right? Or think of the girl who invests so much in a relationship where he never realizes his potential and you're just kind of stuck. Or think about us in our lives trying to invest in climbing a ladder that's up against the wrong wall, you know, of becoming unsatisfied with who we are even though we put so much into a persona that is ultimately letting us down. So for many of us, there'd be a lot of wisdom in getting back to zero. I love something the author C.S. Lewis said. He said, progress means getting nearer to the place you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turning, then to go forward does not get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. I found interesting, I know we hear a lot about Donald Trump on the news these days, but I do enjoy a story about him that comes from his daughter Ivanka. And you can take it as negative or positive depending on how you look at it, which is a nice vagueness coming from a Sunday morning pulpit about those things. But Ivanka tells the story of walking Times Square with her billionaire father, and there's a bum on the street, and she's kind of scared of him. And Donald stops her and has her look at the man on the street, and he says, you know what? That man is $8 million richer than we are. Why is that the case? It's because he had so much debt, at least at that particular time. And it's a powerful idea of how, for some of us, to be at zero and to not have a lot would be to be much better off than in some other cases, even though we may appear to have so much. You know, if you had that time where you weren't spending anything, what would you do? Perhaps you would do something you really enjoy. Perhaps you'd enjoy your life a lot better. And I know in our church we're often conveying and championing the prosperity gospel. We see it in churches all over that God wants us to be rich and abundant and happy. And that's absolutely true, but an important part of our tradition and all mystical spiritual traditions is that idea of the renunciate. It's the person who lets go of the material life. It's the person who stops working to try and have money being their source and tries to allow God to be their source. You know, sometimes they choose to no longer engage in marriages or sex or whatever it may be. But it's an important kind of character. that learns to trust God and God only as their source through whatever means it may come through. Jesus used to mock his disciples. He'd say, you have nowhere to lay your head. You're always worrying all the time. You get no rest. Look at the plants. They don't struggle to grow. Look at the birds. They're not afraid where their next meal is going to come from. And which one of you, through worry, can add an hour to his life? So, Jesus, who didn't have a job, was focused on having the divine be his source. The Buddha was someone who was like this too. He shared with the people his first idea of something he called the Four Noble Truths. He said the first truth is that there's suffering. Very inspiring, isn't it? You're all going to suffer. Second, that the cause of suffering is the attachment of desire, the attachment to outcome, the attachment to that materialism. Buddha said that there was a way to get out of suffering, and that was to release the attachment of those desires. And the way to do that was through something he called the Eightfold Path, which was right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right contemplation. Another way to say all of this was to take out all that you've invested into this material world, which can cause pain, even though I love the pain of it sometimes. I can get really involved with it. But bring yourself back to that place of zero. Bring yourself to the present moment and live again from a place of seeing truly, of viewing rightly. My message today is to not quit your job and go out to the corner with a begging bowl, but maybe take that Sabbath day or a day a week where you're not so engaged in spending, that you can experience the divine as your source. Maybe take an hour within the day to not be so caught up in the rat race, that you can calm down and feel yourself being fed at a spiritual or soulful level. There's something very powerful when we do what Parker Palmer invited us to do. He said, before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. We can only really get to the space when we kind of remove ourselves from, including the problems, all the stuff that we get engaged in, to open ourselves to be receptive again. And that's the last point I wanted to make today about the art of being broke, I guess we can call that. And that is that it forces you to be receptive. And a lot of us, that's the hardest thing for us to do. Not just to receive money from somebody, but much less they give us a compliment, right? It's hard sometimes for us to receive love. We're victims of what I like to call the spiritual gag reflex. It's all there, but there's something as we've trained ourselves to say no sometimes to the good that might be available to us. Shunryu Suzuki was the great Zen teacher, and one day one of his students walked in with a $20 bill she had found on the street, and she said, Roshi, what should I do? Should I put a note out by where I found it? Should I take it to the bank or the police station? And Suzuki took the note, put it in his robe, and said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. And it's a simple but powerful story to this idea that although we should have good morals, we should also be receptive to what the universe wants to give to us. I had a great lunch with Paul and Yvonne Woods a couple weeks ago, and Yvonne Woods, who was a student of the great Reverend Peggy Bassett, who was a long-time, well-known minister, and she said that Peggy used to always teach that the universe is wanting to give to you all the time, so always be receptive to it. Even if you find a penny on the ground, make sure you stop and pick it up and say thank you, because that's the way that the universe is wanting to give to you. And she said she had heard that sermon, and she was walking with a friend about a week or so later, and she saw a penny on the ground, and she picked it up and smiled, and her friend kind of made fun of her a little bit for it. What are you picking up pennies for? And Yvonne shared the story with her, and a couple weeks later they were walking again, and all of a sudden she came upon a penny, and then another penny, and then several more pennies, and then several more pennies after that. It must have been like a piggy bank exploded or something. So just all these hundreds of pennies, and it was just a great sign to her of the truth of that statement, to be always receptive. The gift at first may be small, but it can lead to more and more. And if we want to really live in prosperous living, not only do we have to be willing to give, but we must be willing to receive as well, understanding that the universe is always wanting to give to us. And that's why I want to get back to that dollar today. And that dollar is symbolic of something. It's symbolic that the greatest realization of prosperity that we can ever have is that we are provided for. The greatest realization about prosperity that you could ever have is that you are provided for. The greatest realization of prosperity that I could ever have is that I am provided for. Joseph Campbell, during the time in that depression, he said that all of that time, he always had this dollar bill. And he would always leave it in a drawer. And he said that even when I was going hungry, no matter what was taking place, I knew that as long as that dollar bill was safely in that drawer, I was going to be okay. And that's what that little dollar bill is a gift to you today, to keep, to put somewhere, and just to tell yourself, it's not the bill itself, it's the symbol, it's what it represents. But as long as you have that dollar bill, you're going to be okay. As long as you have that dollar bill, you're going to be provided for. As long as you have that dollar bill, you have something to remind yourself of, that there is a presence. It is not always visible. Sometimes it is invisible. But where it is invisible, that is our opportunity to be present for itself, to give itself a form. In the form of a gift to us, or in form of a realization even through us. The divine is always giving of itself. The question is, are we participating in its infinite givingness? I'm about to read a prayer where these words are contained. We cannot contract the infinite, but we can expand the finite. Prosperity is about understanding the infinite and learning to expand the finite in our lives through recognizing it, honoring it, and using its principles for greater clarity in all that we do. So if you choose, we're going to close with a prayer with some words from Ernest Holmes. Receive them however you like, and they go like this. How can we receive what the mind refuses to entertain? Should we not then consciously develop the ability to receive more? We make life little and mean and limit our own possibilities when we refuse to accept the whole gift of God. We should open our consciousness to a receptivity of the divine. There will never be any point of saturation because God is infinite. We cannot contract the infinite, but we can expand the finite. Today I ask and know that I shall receive. Today I seek and know that I shall find. Today I know and know that it shall be opened unto me. But what is it that I ask for? What is it that I really seek? It is to discover God in everything, to see the divine manifest in everyone, to come into close and conscious communion with life. Today, then, I receive the gift of God in its fullness, unstinted, complete.